Hey everybody, Qroo here. Welcome to the channel. Have you been studying Spanish for a while, and although you can make sentences on your own and talk about different things, you're still struggling to understand native speakers when they speak? If so, then this video is for you. Today I'm going to share some tips on how to improve your listening comprehension in Spanish. Now these are tips from a guy who has been where you are. There was a time when I struggled to understand native speakers. I was like, why are they talking so fast? I'd catch a word here and there, but I just wasn't grasping it. Fast forward a little, and not only was I able to understand them, I was conducting detailed interviews with native speakers 100% in Spanish, and those translations were standing up in court. That requires a lot of listening comprehension. So today, I'm going to share some tips to help you improve your ear for the Spanish language. My number one tip is to focus on the Spanish spoken in one particular country or region. You know, people are so resistant to doing this. I know with the internet, you have access to watch videos from all over the world and hear Spanish spoken in all the different countries, and that's great, you know, but sometimes it's information overload. And when it comes to developing your listening comprehension skills in Spanish, this may actually be hindering you. You see, Spanish varies just like English varies as you go from different countries and regions. And it's not just accent either. You have word choice, sentence structure. For example, how people may typically phrase something in one particular area may differ than how they phrase it in a different area or a different country. To complicate things, you have different idiomatic expressions, slang, and even some of the rules of grammar are going to change by country or region. Think of it this way. Most of the folks who watch this channel, but not all, are native English speakers. So let's flip the script a bit, all right? Let's say a non-native English speaker told you that they were having trouble developing their ear for English. So you're like, okay, so what are you doing to learn it, to improve your ear? And they're like, well, you know, I watch YouTube videos all the time. And they're like, well, that's good. Yeah, I like this guy from Ireland a lot. He covers pronouns. And there's a couple guys from England. One of them speaks a little bit differently. I think it's that Cockney English or something, but they're great. And then there's this guy in New York. He has this other YouTube channel, and a lady in Louisiana down in the bayou. And then there's an Australian. Oh, and I like the series from India a lot. Right away, you're going to be like, well, it's obvious why you can't develop an ear for the language. You are being bombarded by different dialects of English. Pick a country. I don't know why people are so resistant to doing that when it comes to Spanish. You know, English is my first language and I've spoken it for over 50 years, but when I'm watching certain shows or videos from other English-speaking countries, I put the subtitles on so I don't miss anything. I learned Spanish working as a deputy sheriff in a county in Florida with a very large Mexican migrant population. So my ear developed quickly to their accent, their way of phrasing things, their idiomatic expressions, their slang, everything. But to illustrate what I'm talking about, whenever I was called to translate for Spanish speakers from other places like, say, Puerto Rico or Cuba, things like that, I immediately noticed the difference in the Spanish. I had to focus more, and sometimes listening comprehension was a lot more challenging for me. Deputies would often call me on the phone from a traffic stop or a call for service they were on and ask if I could just translate over the phone for them. My standard response was always, it depends where the Spanish speaker's from. If they're from Mexico, sure. Hand them the phone, we're not going to have any trouble. If not, I may need to drive there because it's easier to understand people when you can see their mouths move, you know, their body expressions, things like that. On one such occasion, I could not translate on the phone because the fellow was from Cuba. Where I worked, we had very few Cubans, so I did not have an ear for their particular dialect. And that surprises people when I say I was a cop in Florida because they're like, I thought it was like lots of Cubans. That's South Florida. This is Central Florida. It was mostly Mexicans. All right, back to our story. I tried to talk to him, I couldn't, so I went to the scene. I get there, I'm like, ¿Cuál es el problema? What's the problem? And he's like, mi cao. I'm like, you're what? ¿Qué? Mi cao, mi cao. Kept saying mi cao. I had no idea what mi cao was. So I said, ¿Qué es eso? And he points to his car. I said, ¿Su carro? Sí, mi cao. I was like, Señor, tiene que pronunciar mejor las palabras o estaremos aquí todo el día. But really, it's more than just accents and slang. And that's what people always think, oh, the accent's a little different or there's some slang. No, it's much more than that. Many times the words for basic things will be different. I mean, it's not slang. They just use a completely different word in one place versus the other. I speak a very Mexican Spanish. My wife is from Colombia. I use different words for things when I'm communicating with her family. Here's a couple of examples. In Colombia, a sidewalk is acera. In Mexico, banqueta. Those aren't even close, are they? A drinking straw? In Colombia, pitillo. In Mexico, popote, which my wife says is kind of an ugly word that just sounds like a big poop. The trunk of the car? In Colombia, baúl. Sometimes you might hear maletero. And in Mexico, cajuela. There are a lot of examples like that, and if I start adding other countries and their vocabulary, the list of just differences can get really long. So if you're listening to people from different countries, how do you expect to develop your ear for that when you're hearing completely different vocabulary for the same thing? And what can be even more frustrating is you may know a word, but it has a completely different meaning in a different country. Here's an example of that. The Spanish word mono is often translated as monkey, but in Colombia, it's also used for rubio, or blonde. When I first went to Colombia many years ago, I actually had hair, and some people actually called me mono, which at first was like, what? Here's another one, the Spanish verb coger. It's constantly used in Colombia for like to take, grab, or catch something, like go catch the bus, etc. In Mexico, the same verb falls into the profanity category, and it is a very strong way to say to fornicate. So when a Colombian says he's going to catch the bus, that's not what the Mexican is hearing. It does make for some amusing translations though, right? So now hopefully you see how it can help you to narrow down your target area for Spanish. So what's the next step? My second tip is to expose yourself to the spoken language as much as possible. Listen to the news, podcasts, radio. If you are going to do radio, I recommend talk radio. The news is a great place to start because they tend to speak more clearly. They don't use street slang. However, they will use idiomatic expressions and vocabulary common to that country. It's very easy to find newscasts from all over the world on YouTube. Just type in noticias and then the country you're looking for. Mexico, España, whatever. Let's talk about subtitles. It's okay to use subtitles in Spanish because it may help you pick up on words that you missed, but don't use them in English. You're just going to start to rely on that and you're not going to learn it. We'll move on to my third tip, and that is reading. Do it all the time. I know you're working on your listening comprehension, but this is going to really help you. Whenever possible, try to find sources from your target country or area. One good place to start is, again, with the news. I like to start my day by enjoying my coffee and reading different news sources from around Mexico. Reading the language is good because it allows you to slow down and really notice certain constructions and vocabulary. You can take time to look up words you don't know. If you do this on a regular basis, you're going to start to notice the same constructions and vocabulary used over and over. This is going to reinforce those in your memory. If you do that daily, you're going to see your Spanish improve dramatically, I promise you. My fourth tip is to really push yourself to improve your Spanish. I don't mean just playing on Duolingo all day, because that's just a fun video game, but it's not really pushing you. Get in the habit of trying to work Spanish into your day. Talk to yourself in Spanish. Kind of narrate what you're doing. If you can't think of how to say something, go look it up. Put it in something like DeepL, which is a really good online translator. I'll put a link to it in the description portion of the video, or possibly Google Translate. Like, let's say you're like, oh, I'm going to narrate my day. I got up at 6. And you're like, I don't know how to say, I got up at 6. Plug it in there. You'll see some options. And you're like, oh, it uses levantarse, to get up. Ah, that's a good verb. Let me add that to my list. Just get in the habit of doing that. Goal setting is very important to the process. It helps you stay focused and also measure your progress. But it's very important to set realistic goals. And sometimes people don't. Some people are like, I'm going to spend 2 hours a day. I'm going to learn 20 new words a day. That's just not going to work. If you said something realistic like, I'll never do less than 30 minutes a day, even if I don't feel well or something like that, never less than that. And I'm going to learn at least 2 new Spanish words or phrases a day. I know 2 doesn't sound like very much, but that adds up pretty quickly. And my fifth and final tip to help you improve your listening comprehension in Spanish is to seek opportunities to have conversations in Spanish. Thanks to the internet, this has never been easier. I don't care where you live in the world, you can get on your computer and talk to somebody in Spanish. Now, if you really want those interactions to be productive, you have to push yourself out of your comfort zone. Get out of the, oh, how are you, and how am I, and why am I learning Spanish, and start to talk about different topics. Really let that person kind of push you. Don't be afraid to make a mistake or say something wrong. It's all part of the process. Just get in there and start using your Spanish. Well, there you have it. Those are my tips to help you improve your listening comprehension in Spanish. If you enjoyed the video, do me a favor and give it a thumbs up. And until next time, hasta luego.